Okay, so now it's time to cut our tubes that will set within those circles, and we're going to set little stones. So you're going to have your circles, we're going to do some piercing, we're going to have our granulation, and then just kind of randomly we're going to have that little glint of a stone. So now it is time to measure and cut our tubing. Now I hope that every one of you went ahead and saw the video I put in Info for All that talks about stone setting. There's some info and some organization, but if you haven't seen that, let me ask you to go ahead and stop this video here, go over and watch that video. There's a ton of information in there about stones, tube setting, and all of that. So if you haven't seen that, please go watch that now and then come back to this step. I think you'll be much better armed with information for this next step. So I have a tube here, and my tube is, let's find the caliper here. And the exterior is roughly a little over 5.5. So we'll call it 5.5. The interior is roughly 4.15, give or take. Now the stones that I've chosen for this are 5mm machine cut CZs. Now when you're starting out, let me tell you, the easiest stone you can set is a machine cut CZ. They're inexpensive. You can practice a ton with, and even if you lose one in the carpet or the crevices of the studio, that's okay, because you haven't lost a diamond. Then once you get really proficient, you can put some diamonds in your work. Okay, so now I have a tube here. This is for our 5mm, and I'm just going to draw here on this lip, so maybe you can see. I know with these lights, particularly with the CZ, they sparkle so much that they're very difficult to see, and the silver is the same. So I'm going to draw or I'm going to ink in here this lip, hopefully in an effort for you guys to see when I set that CZ on there. We need very little metal to press over the CZ. Now, as I discussed in the other video, organization for stone setting and that type of thing, you will need some sort of wax. This is just a little wax tube, as you can just trim it off as you need more, and you just need a little point, but it's really stiff, so I just work it with my hands until it gets nice and warm, and then I can form it into just a little point. It's an amazing thing because you just barely touch it and pick it up, but it also comes off just as easily. So whoever discovered this or first did this, they discovered a very good thing, because you can't manipulate these with your fingers. They're just, this one would be better, but the smaller you go, the more difficult it is. So I have that CZ set on there, and I don't have any clue if you'll be able to see that. I don't know that shielding that helped at all. But what I am seeing is a rim. It is sitting there and it is not dropping through, and there is, I can see a good amount of metal all the way around. Now you need very little metal to hold any kind of stone in place. It just needs to not have a wobble of any kind, and as long as it's seated in there, then when the metal compresses tightly over it, even the smallest amount of metal will hold it in place. But you want to make sure you have the right tube size. So you want the tube bigger, at least 1/4 of a millimeter all the way around than the stone, and you want the inside diameter smaller than the stone, because then we are going to take this setting burr, which you'll notice is the exact same shape as the stone, and when we drill that in there, it will mimic the shape of the stone and it will give us a good seat. Then once we drill that seat in there, we'll put the stone in there and we'll compress it over the top. So now that you've seen that, and that is regardless of what size your stone and your tube is, you will always need it to be bigger on the outside and smaller on the inside. Now, this tube was floating around in my tray. I do not know if it's fine silver or if it's argentium. Let me recommend fine silver when you're starting out. It's much softer than argentium. Argentium is better than sterling, and it's much softer to manipulate when it's annealed, but then gets harder later. But particularly for those of you who are starting out, let me suggest fine silver too. And I use fine silver too most of the time because it makes no difference, and you don't need strength in a tube, you just need structure. So now what we're going to do is we're going to cut our tube. What I want is, so we're going to have these rings positioned at various places, and these, I need to flatten these a little bit. We're going to have these positioned at various places. The wire is all the same gauge, so the height will be the same. But what we want, and I've got a couple tubes here, we want the tube to be twice the height of the wire. Now, I've actually put 2 of these together, and I adjusted my dividers, and then I added a millimeter or 2 just to give us some space, because once we put it on there, we're going to sand and file the top to make it nice and smooth and shiny. So that's what you're going to need to do. Take your dividers and then measure twice the height of your rings, and then add a millimeter or 2 to give you some space. Now, we are going to need 3 of the 5 millimeters. I've cut 2 over here. The easiest thing for you to do is to take your Sharpie and come down and color it all the way around. A fatter Sharpie would probably serve you better, but I don't have a fat Sharpie handy, so I'm going to use my fine point. So now I have it colored all the way around. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my dividers and I'm going to hang one edge off of, I think I need to color that down just a little bit more, just to get the effect that we need. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang one leg of that divider off, and I'm not going to move the divider. I'm going to just simply turn the tube and let the other leg scratch a very slight line in that Sharpie. Now you don't need it big. You just need, that's the good thing about putting the Sharpie is in is because you just need a small scratch to scratch away that Sharpie and reveal that silver, so you'll know where to cut. And I'm hoping that you can see that. Okay. Now, there are different ways to cut the tubing, but you want to cut it as flush as possible. So I challenge you to take your time on this. Now, I mentioned in the other video that Charles Lutenbrain has a video out there. Again, I'm going to try to find that, and it was not a video about cutting tubing, but whatever project he was doing, he was cutting tubing, and he took just a minute to show a few little ways to do it. One way, which I thought was fascinating, was to put it in your flex shaft, but I did measure. My handpiece does not open up big enough to put this size tubing in there. We'll try it maybe with some smaller tubing. So you can use a miter jig, and that is the way I normally do it, but because I know most of you do not have one of this, I'm going to show you how to do it without this. So we're going to set that aside, and you're going to want to make sure that your saw blade is nice and tight and lubricated. So instead of putting him down here, I'm going to hold it right here on my bench pin, and I want my saw to be right up against that bench pin. It's going to help me steady it. And I am putting that silver line that was scratched right there at that saw blade, and then I'm making a cut. Then I'm going to turn it just a little bit, line everything up again, make another cut. I'm going to turn it again. I'm going to do this process all the way around, making sure that I'm only turning it a little bit, and I'm making sure that my blade is right on that line, and I'm making one cut down. This is cutting a groove. You know, before we just had a scratch in the Sharpie. Now it's cutting a groove. And that groove will allow our blade to actually have a place to rest in. Take your time doing this. Each time, make sure that your saw blade is resting stable up against the bench pin, and that it is exactly on that scratch line. Now, we're going to go around this 2 or 3 times, each time making that groove deeper. Now that I have a groove, I don't have to remove my saw every time. I can leave it resting in that groove. Saw one time, turn, saw one time, turn, and I can continue around the tube . This seems tedious and it seems cumbersome, but it is less tedious than trying to file or sand it level later. Continue to turn. Okay, and my saw blade blade needs some more lubrication. When it does, stop, line yourself back up in the groove, and continue around the tube. You probably want to make sure your bench tray is open, because when that thing gets ready to drop off, you don't want to have to be hunting for it. Okay, I'm getting closer to the center, and you will notice that your saw blade may want to hang up. That's okay. See, it cut all the way through then. I'm going to peel it off, and I'm going to come over here to the other side. Let me see if I can, yep, right there's where I need to saw. There we go. So now I have 3 tubes. There we go. So now I have 3 tubes. These are the 5mm tubes. So what we need is 1 tube each, one on each earring and one on the pendant. Now on we're going to gradiate and get smaller and smaller. So, but on the earrings we only need 2, so we're going to need a little bit smaller on the earrings, and we're going to do 3 of those, and then we'll do another even smaller one on the bottom of the pendant. Put one size of the tubes that you've cut into 1 cup. You can go ahead and put your stones in there as well. Just push them through. That way it'll keep everything organized. Once you, I'm even going to put my burrs in there, and I'm going to set it to the side. I'm going to put these back in their correct baggie. It is, let me challenge you on this. It is so easy to get these mixed up. So I'm going to put the 5mm. I'm going to put them back in my tray. And then when I get ready to put my burrs back in here, I'll just put them, because I have them marked as 5, and so I'll know to put them back in this bag. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do 4mm. That's one size smaller. So I'm going to pull out my 4mm. I'm going to find my tube that will fit that. And again, I have random tubing laying out there. So let's see how big this tube is. I'm going to turn this around so you guys can see. I'm going to hit 0 to zero that out. Okay. Okay, that looks big enough on the outside. Let's see what we can determine about the inside. Yes, it's smaller than the 4 on the inside. So this is the tubing that I will use for the 4mm stones. same process, but we're only going to cut 2 this time. So I'm going to take my Sharpie. Now I'm going to use the miter jig this time just so you can see how that works. It is a little faster than the method I just showed you, but you still have to be careful to make sure that you are cutting with your blade flush down onto the vise. I have cut some before that I wasn't paying attention and didn't realize that my saw blade had raised up on one side, and so I was actually cutting at an angle, not flush. Now, some of you might wonder, for efficiency's sake, why I don't go ahead and do my marks and then cut them. First of all, it's easier to have an edge to hang on. Plus, once you cut it, it may be just even a fraction of a millimeter off. So mark one at a time. And again, we're going to hang that edge off of there, and we're going to turn our tube to mark it. We want that Sharpie to scratch away. Okay, so once we've done that, we're going to open up our miter jig. These knobs on the bottom will help you separate. And with a miter jig, you will see that there are right angles, and then there are also 30 and 60 degrees. So this is a handy little tool for cutting something at an angle. Now it is limited on its size, but that's okay too. These little knobs on the side help put this stop in there. So let's say I had marked 5 millimeter. If I was doing several of these, and since I am going to do one more, I could do that. But I would put my tube in. We'll just show you. So I'm going to put my tube in, and I'm going to go ahead and just do it this way, tighten it up a little bit. Sometimes I think I need 4 or 5 hands. So I'm putting it in the groove that has, it's almost like a square or a diamond little shape. Now I'm not tightening it way down because I don't have it where I want it. But I do have it in there enough that I can just slightly undo that and then slide this up until I see that shiny line. And I'm going to just gently work that until that shiny line sits right above the edge. And then I'm going to tighten these down. Okay. So I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but that shiny line that we scratched in there is sitting right above that guide. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this in here. It's going to measure that. It's going to rest right on the top. Okay. And then I'm going to tighten this down. It's tightening this down. Okay. So now I'm going to saw it. Lubricate your saw. Now I never saw right straight across because your saw blade will get caught in there. So I'm always coming at an angle. So I will come this way for a while and then I will switch and come this way. And I may go back and forth a few times. Find yourself a steady place where you can monitor your saw blade, but also where the bolts on your or the nuts on your saw blade doesn't get caught. And just go back and forth. Now you don't want to push so hard on your saw blade that you bend it and eventually break it. watch your saw blade, make sure that both sides are resting on the jig. Okay, I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to saw from this direction for a little while. I'm going to turn it this way for a little bit. This is the same principle as turning it and sawing it when we were freehanding it. Okay, I'm going to turn it this way. I'm going to come from this direction. I'm going to come back this direction. And I'm almost all the way through. And there it goes. All right, so now all I need to do is I'm not going to touch this. I'm going to leave that the same, and I'm just going to barely open that, and just enough to slide the tube up until it rests on that stop, and then I'm going to tighten this back down, and I'm going to saw the next tube. Same process. I will admit sometimes this is a little bit unwieldy, but it gives you accurate results. Another thing that's this jig is good for, if you're doing some type of construction where you want your sheet metal, and let me recommend thicker sheet metal, that you want 45-degree angles, maybe to do some type of a little box or a bend, or even thick wire, and you're wanting to join them at a precise 90-degree angle. You can put them in here and saw them or file them. I would go ahead and cut them and then put them in here just barely sticking out, and then file your 90-degree angle on there. And then you can fuse or solder very accurately. Okay, we're almost back through. I always go slower when I think I'm about to pop through so that my saw blade doesn't fling it somewhere far away. And there we go. So now we have our two 4mm settings. I'm going to get another little cup. I'm going to put those in there. I'm going to get me two 4mm stones. Now I'm going to write on the bottom of my cup, I'm going to write a great big 4. Not very good penmanship, but I get the point. Another benefit of those little disposable cups. So I'm going to pop out. Now these have multiples in them. Here's a little baggie with, looks like they have, some of them have 2, some of them have 3. So I'm going to pop out 2 of these little guys. Just going to rip that little bag off since there's only 2 in it. Put them in there. Let me get out my 4mm burr, put those in there. Now at this point, let me tell you, if you did not want to have to buy so many burrs and you didn't want to have to do so many different sizes of stones, you could do just one in each, one of the 5mm or 4, whatever your choice is. Or you could even do multiples of the same size. I'm doing the different sizes because I have it, I like it, I think it's a beautiful design aesthetic. But let me encourage you, if you don't want to buy all of that right now, you can just stick with one size. Say I've got my 4, and I'm going to drop him back here, and now all I need is for the bottom of the necklace, or near the bottom of the pendant, is just one smaller size. So we've done a 5 and we've done a 4. Let me see, let's do a 3. They're tiny. And I'll need a tube. That's a bigger one. I think this is the right size. I try to mark most of the time on my baggies. This one says fine silver and it has a 2.54 inside. Rio puts on the bag on the outside, so that's a 3.55, so it's bigger than the 3 stone, and the 2.54 is smaller than the 3mm. Get me a cup. I'm going to write 3 in this. I'm going to go ahead and put I think I need a bigger baggie. Okay, I'm not going to be using the bud burrs. I do not need them for tube setting. So I'm going to set those there. I'm going to put the setting burrs in the little cup, and then I'm going to get my stones out. I just need one. So put one in my cup and put the rest of these back. Alright, so I will put that back in my baggie along with my bud burrs, which I do not need. Okay, put those back in here. Okay, so again, we're doing the exact same depth. All of our stones will be at that depth. Now, something you might want to try later, which I think would be really, really cool, is maybe varying the heights of the stone settings. So not only do you have all the dimensions that we're going to have on this, that your stones can be at different heights. I think that would be really pretty, but that's something you would want to work out and plan for. You're going to always need enough room around your tube to be able to have a tool in there to press over. Now, even if you use the stone setters that I've showed you in the other video, you're still going to need room around that tube in order to press the metal in. So no matter if you're using a tool, so plan for that. So even if you want them different heights, you certainly can't put them in the tubes right next up against each other. So now I have that mark. I'm going to do the same as before, hang that over, and I'm going to scratch all the way around. I'm going to put it in my jig. I still have that stop, so I'm going to leave that there, but I just wanted to show you that you did this. You do the same thing. So I'm going to push it, put that in there, and let it rest. I'm going to turn it this way. I should have gone ahead probably and cranked it down a little bit. There we go. Now it's tightening up. So you'll see that it's resting against the stop. So exactly as I did with the other one, I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut at an angle, making sure that my saw blade is right up against the jig. Now I'm holding the tube, and I've also got this here as well, but be careful because these tubes will bend, and you do not want to bend them if at all possible, because you won't get them straightened out. I'm really not gripping that tube tight. I'm just kind of letting it rest in that portion of my hand. Okay, and I'm going to go move it and go around from this side. Making sure my saw blade is flush. Okay, I'm going to turn it. Come at the side a little bit. The side over here. I do not want to be cutting on the stop. I would just want to make sure I'm cutting on the tube. So I'm going to come back here. We're getting in pretty deep, so it's wanting to hang up a little. Play nice with me now. There we go. There must have been a little burr or something created on the inside there. Okay. Chase him down. There he is. Okay, so I have that little tube. I'm going to remove this tube, pull him out. You never want to leave the tube in the jig. It will bend drastically. Okay, so I'm going to put him in there. Now we have all of our tubes cut. So now it's time to lay out our pattern.